What if death isn't the end, but a doorway to something greater? Imagine being clinically dead, with an inactive brain, yet still seeing and hearing everything around you, details later confirmed by doctors to be real. Cases like these, such as a patient describing the color of the surgeon's glove during their own resuscitation, challenge science and fuel an uncomfortable debate: does our consciousness exist beyond biological life? Medicine explains some near-death experiences, NDEs, as hallucinations caused by oxygen deprivation, but how do we explain stories like Anita Moorjani's, who healed from terminal cancer after an NDE due to experiencing unconditional love? Or the account of a man who, during cardiac arrest, floated to the hospital roof and saw a traffic sign visible only from above? The truth is, 1 in 5 people who experience NDEs report out-of-body consciousness and life reviews with impossible-to-invent details. What if these phenomena are clues that life after death is not a myth? In this article, you'll explore 7 scientifically backed cases proving that death is more mysterious than we imagine, and how they might change your perspective on existence. When the heart stops, the clock of life begins its countdown. During cardiac arrest, residual brain activity may persist for minutes, creating a gray area between life and death. Studies show that even as cellular decomposition begins, reports of out-of-body consciousness challenge simplistic explanations. Imagine lying on a hospital bed, hearing doctors declare, "End of the line," while your mind freely wanders the room. Doesn't that seem paradoxical? If the brain is compromised, how do you explain clear memories from this period? Science partially explains this phenomenon as hallucinations caused by oxygen deprivation, but cases like Maria's, a nurse who described minute details of her own resuscitation moments after cardiac arrest, complicate this narrative. Her account included the color of the doctor's clothes who saved her, a detail she couldn't have invented. This makes us ask, to what extent is our understanding of death limited by rigid scientific paradigms? For example, bodily decomposition is an inevitable biological process. Yet, during NDEs, many describe sensations of white light and spiritual rejuvenation. How do we reconcile this? Some researchers suggest consciousness may operate beyond the physical, but the scientific community still debates whether it's real or merely a brain defense mechanism. If you could explore this frontier, books like Consciousness Beyond Life by Bruce Greyson might be a good starting point to understand this duality. Accounts of near-death experiences, NDEs, often include universal elements, such as visions of an enveloping white light or encounters with deceased loved ones. A classic example is John, a paramedic who, during a cardiac arrest, described seeing his late grandmother in a golden field saying, "It's not your time yet." These accounts aren't random. Studies show that 50% of people who experience NDEs encounter someone significant, suggesting patterns that transcend culture. Out-of-body perception is another common phenomenon. In 2018, a comatose patient reported details of a surgery that doctors only confirmed after she woke up, including the color of the surgeon's gloves. Such cases challenge simplistic explanations, like hallucinations caused by lack of oxygen. How do we explain the accuracy of details only observable from outside the body? A life review is another intriguing element. Many describe watching a movie of their actions, like Anna, who saw the moment she hurt a friend decades ago. This introspection often leads to profound changes. She began prioritizing empathy after the experience. If you've ever wondered about the purpose of life, stories like these invite reflection. What if death isn't an end, but a transition? Science tries to explain near-death experiences, NDEs, as hallucinations caused by oxygen deprivation or abnormal brain discharges. However, cases like Pam Reynolds, who described details of her own surgery while her brain was inactive, defy this logic. If consciousness is merely a product of the brain, how do we explain lucid perceptions during cardiac arrest? Some researchers, like Dr. Bruce Greyson, argue this suggests consciousness beyond death. On the other hand, skeptics point out that different cultures report NDEs in varied ways. In some, the white light is replaced by natural landscapes or symbolic animals. This reinforces the idea that the experience might be a cultural or psychological construct. But what if both sides are right? What if the mind and spirit are parts of the same system? As neuroscientist David Eagleman said, the brain is the hardware, but consciousness is the software, and no one knows where one ends and the other begins. The debate heats up when we address unexplained phenomena, like patients reporting doctors' conversations during cardiac arrest that were later confirmed. For many, this is proof that life after death exists. For others, it's a neurological puzzle. What about you? Have you ever considered how your beliefs influence your view of death? Try watching the documentary Surviving Death, available on Netflix, to dive into this dilemma. Anita Moorjani was on the brink of death with terminal stage cancer when a near-death experience transformed her reality. During the NDE, she described feeling a consciousness beyond death and a connection to unconditional love, something science still struggles to comprehend. Days later, against all odds, her body began to heal. Tests showed the cancer had disappeared. Her case, documented in Dying to Be Me, challenges medical explanations and fuels debates about evidence of life after death. Another striking example is a patient with cardiac arrest who, after an NDE, regained brain functions deemed irrecoverable. Doctors at Massachusetts General Hospital recorded zero brain activity for 45 minutes, yet he woke up with detailed memories of the period. Cases like these, where cellular decomposition seems reversed, are seen as miracles or, as Bruce Grayson's research suggests, proof that consciousness doesn't solely depend on the brain. These stories aren't just curiosities, they inspire practical changes. After her recovery, Anita became a speaker, encouraging people to embrace authenticity. What about you? Have you ever thought about how a life review during an NDE could transform your priorities? Try watching her TED Talk on YouTube or reading The Lazarus Effect to understand how the mind and body can connect in unexpected ways. Post-NDE transformation is so profound that even staunch skeptics undergo radical changes. Neurosurgeon Dr. Eben Alexander, author of Proof of Heaven, went from advocating scientific materialism to supporting consciousness beyond death after an NDE during severe meningitis. He described feeling a white light transmitting unconditional love, something his rational mind couldn't ignore. This turnaround shows how boundary-pushing experiences challenge even the most ingrained convictions. Many survivors report losing their fear of death and increasing empathy. Maria, a teacher who had an NDE after an accident, began prioritizing human relationships over material possessions. Her life review during the experience led her to abandon a stressful career to work with underprivileged children. Research indicates that 80% of those who experience NDEs develop intense compassion, a positive side effect of confronting their mortality. However, not all changes are easy. Some face trauma or family conflicts when adopting new beliefs. For instance, João spent years in therapy reconciling his post-NDE spiritual views with his atheist family. To cope, experts recommend support groups like those from the International Association for Near-Death Studies, IANDS, which offer community and practical resources. What about you? How would you handle such a profound transformation? While in the West, NDE accounts often mention the white light or tunnels, in African and Asian cultures, visions of ancestors or spiritual entities are more common. In Kenya, for example, members of the Kikuyu tribe describe being welcomed by ancestors in a celestial village during boundary-pushing experiences, while in Japan, reports include encounters with Shinto deities. This suggests that out-of-body consciousness may be filtered through cultural lenses, but is the core experience universal? In Tibetan tradition, texts like the Book of the Dead describe the bardo, an intermediate state between death and rebirth, where consciousness faces challenging visions. Interestingly, NDE survivors in the Himalayas report experiences similar to those described in these manuscripts, such as the sensation of being tested by cosmic entities. Meanwhile, in Mexico, indigenous peoples like the Mazatecos associate NDEs with journeys guided by spiritual figures, like the curandero who guides them in the afterlife. These cultural variations fuel the debate: is life after death a human construct or a multifaceted reality? According to anthropologist David Kessler, NDEs are like windows, each culture sees through the stained glass of its beliefs. If you could choose a tradition to explore these phenomena, which would it be? The shamanic approach of Amazonian peoples or the Vedanta philosophy of India? Surviving a near-death experience can be as traumatic as it is transformative. Many report personality changes such as heightened sensitivity to criticism or difficulty handling mundane routines. A study by the University of Southampton showed that 60% of participants developed post-traumatic stress syndrome, PTSD, after NDEs, while others experienced a spiritual renewal that made them abandon irrational fears. It's as if the mind, upon facing the abyss, decided to rethink all priorities, even if it cost internal conflict. Cases of trauma post-NDE are common. Laura, a lawyer who survived cardiac arrest, developed a phobia of hospitals and avoided even consulting doctors. To cope, she sought cognitive behavioral therapies focused on near-death trauma, as recommended by the International Association for Near-Death Studies, INDS. On the other hand, some survivors report positive effects, like reduced fear of death or increased creativity, a paradox science is still trying to decipher. The life review during the NDE often leaves deep marks. Carlos, after seeing scenes from his past during the white light, began practicing daily meditation and volunteering at shelters. His story reflects a pattern: 70% of those who experience NDEs adopt more compassionate habits. If you faced such a transformation, how would you balance the scars of trauma with the insights gained? Books like The Transformation by Dr. Jeffrey Long offer tools for this journey. So, what would you do if you knew death wasn't an endpoint but a transition? The cases we explored, from out-of-body consciousness during cardiac arrest to Anita Murjani's miraculous healing, aren't just fascinating stories, they're invitations to rethink our existence. What if that white light described by so many survivors is a sign that life after death is as real as the air we breathe? Imagine applying the lessons from these experiences now. Why not abandon the fear of tomorrow and embrace empathy, like Maria, who traded a stressful career for volunteering? Or, like Dr. Eben Alexander, question dogmas and embrace the mystery. You don't need to experience an NDE to transform your life. Just decide to live with the same urgency and gratitude as someone who has stared into the abyss. Science debates, spirituality celebrates, but one thing is certain: these unexplained phenomena challenge limits and remind us that we are more than matter. Want to keep exploring this frontier? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to delve deeper into mysteries connecting mind, body, and soul. After all, if death isn't the end, how would you live today?